Hello to everyone that just joined us today. We are so pleased to have you at the Tiqets Culture Festival. Today is our History Day, and we're so pleased to be kicking it off with the Duomo of Milan. So that is all the logistics I have. With that, I'm very happy to transport us all to Milan for the afternoon. Fiamma is joining us to speak. She's a professional tourist guide in Milan and will be showing us virtually around the Duomo this afternoon. So Fiamma, I'll turn it over to you.
So, hello everybody. Nice to meet you. I've seen the notification of the chat and I've read many people arriving from, connecting from all around the world. And so I'm very glad. I also read that some people had already visited the Duomo during some visit of Milan. And so I hope, for you that just visited, it will be a nice way to remember your Milanese stay. And for all other people, of course, it's a way to invite you as soon as possible to join us in a tour and visit Milan and, of course, the Duomo. So just waiting for another couple of minutes, Rachel. In the meanwhile, I'd like to present myself. I am a professional tour guide of the city of Milan. I collaborate with the Veneranda Fabbrica del Duomo, so with the institution running the activities of the Duomo of Milan since a few years. And so I'm really glad for this opportunity and this opportunity that the Duomo and Tiqets gave me to introduce you to the symbol of the city of Milan. So, Rachel, please let me know if.
Yeah. I think we can get started. We have about 120 people from all over the world on the line, and let's show them the Duomo.
Okay, that's perfect.
Okay.
So I will now share my screen with some. Okay. Okay. Is it right? You hear me? Do you see the screen, right?
Yes, we see it now.
Okay. So once again, welcome for the ones which in the last minute joined us. My name is Fiamma Bozzolo. Duomo of Milan, 6th century history. That's in fact a history that will now shortly tell you about the Cathedral of Milan, 6th century old. Yes, in fact, because the construction was started in the late 1300s. And the life of the Duomo is still continuing on, let's say, on a religious point of view, being the cathedral, but also on an artistic and, let's say, builder's point of view. Let's have a look first at the church on the outside. These are some very famous images of the front of the building itself. That's located in the very city center. That's in fact, let's say, the first place where people go once visiting Milan for the first time. The Duomo Square itself is in the middle of the pedestrian area of the shopping area, so that's a very nice area where to go and stroll for Milanese, for locals, and for tourists, of course. Once you arrive, an example, if you're taking the subway and getting upstairs and getting to the surface to the subway, you first arrive and you see the stunning front of this incredible church. Really huge, that's the first thing you notice, and that's in fact one of the biggest churches on earth. That's the third church per dimension, about 12,000 square meters. Very high also. It's a Gothic cathedral, so the height was really important. You can see the spires or the towers getting up to the sky, a way to reach heaven. That was very, very symbolic, in fact. And that's also stunning, the color. this color, this white marble used for the construction of this church. Of course, we will get to all those points during our hour together. So, as you know, it's possible not only to visit the church on this side, it's also possible to go up to the rooftops. So during our time together, we will see something about the interior, something about the inside, the beautiful decorations, the spires, the statues, and so on. And also we'll show you some curiosities about the rooftops, about the beautiful and stunning experience of getting through the spires to the towers and the niches and so on. I mentioned before, this is a Gothic cathedral. So let's have a look at the inside. You can immediately recognize, if you're familiar with this architectural style, the so-called pointed arches. You have to imagine that the Gothic style have been really important, the most important architectural styles, especially for cathedrals, so for the central church, I would say, of a city, of a town, of a region. The cathedral is also where the bishop, or in the case of Milan, the archbishop, celebrates. So, of course, the most, we were saying, the most important, the most representative church of, we've said, of a town, of a region. And that's a really European style, not pretty Italian, I would say, but in fact the Duomo of Milan, it's really a church similar to the ones that you can see in Central Europe, in Western Europe, I mean in France, in Germany, in example. There is a reason for this. Imagine in the 14th century, so when the construction of the Duomo was started in the late 14th century, Milan was an independent state. Italy didn't exist as we know it today. It was all divided into states and city-states, and Milan had a deep relationship, a deep economical relationship with European states and European cities, mostly from an economical point of view. It was an important marketplace. Many merchants moved from Milan to Germany, an example, or vice versa, from Germany to Milan for trade and so on. And so creating a church like this was in fact a way to show that Milan was a European state, let's say an independent country, was said. And so that's why we can see this sort of unique church in Italy, and actually all around on Earth, in fact. Let's say it was a very international construction site, even if at a certain point the local artists, the Milanese, the Lombard artists became, well, let's say the main architects, but since the beginning we have had, in fact, many engineers, many sculptors, artists, generally speaking, moving from France to Germany, from Hungary, and so on, to work in Milan. So they had a different know-how, the European Gothic style, and brought it to Milan, in fact. And then the locals, of course, started to work on this church and, well, put their own local style. An example, look at beautiful capitals. They are very typical of the local tradition. And so that's a sort of a mixture, I would say, of an international style, but mostly a very, very local style. You can also see another point of view, a bit closer to the high altar and the choir. The high altar, remember us of what we had in this region before the construction of the Duomo, because in fact you have to imagine there was another church, another cathedral called the Santa Maria Maggiore, and that was the high altar of the old church. Let's say it was an idea of a sort of continuity with the past of Milan. I told you the construction was started in the late 1300s. You can see precisely 1386. In Italian, it's ancient Italian, this stone says il principio del Duomo di Milano fu nell'anno 1386. Of course, it's difficult for people not speaking Italian, but the beginning of the construction of the Duomo of Milan was the year 1386. That's the meaning of what we are reading. 1386, more than 630 years ago. And the construction lasted for several centuries. It took 500 years about to end the construction. I mean, the building, just the architecture of the walls, of the rooftop. It was only under Napoleon, in fact, that the rooftops and the front were ended, but actually for the entire 19th and part of the 20th century, the construction continued. In fact, it continued with the decorations, the statues, the spires. The end of the construction is considered 1965, so that's why 6th century history. Back in 1386, as I told you, Milan was an independent state. We were a lordship under the Visconti family. This statue that you can see here, well, it represents St. George, but it's quite certainly the portrait of the Duke Gian Galeazzo Visconti, which was at the head of the city of Milan, which had the power over the city of Milan, exactly starting from 1386 for about 20 years. This statue you see here, it's the original statue from the late 1300s, but actually you have to imagine that it's not located on the Duomo, on the church. It's actually in the museum of the Duomo. The point is that many statues had to be replaced with copies, perfect replicas of the ancient one. Precisely this statue was damaged during the bombings of the Second World War, and so it was decided to protect it because it's very representative for the history of the church, and so it's protected in the Museum of the Duomo. In the same place there is, as I told you, a replica built with the same material, which is the Candoglia marble. The quarry of marble is located on Lake Maggiore. It was property of the Dukes of Milan, so of the Viscontis. Gian Galeazzo Visconti decided to give the permission to the Duomo, to the so-called Veneranda Fabbrica del Duomo. That's the institution that, since the very early construction, runs all the activities of the construction and nowadays of the restorations of the Duomo. And so since then, since the late 1300s, they had first the permission of of mining the marble, in fact, from this quarry on Lake Maggiore, and then in the following century, in the 15th century, the quarry was donated to the Duomo, and it's still property of the Veneranda Fabbrica del Duomo, of the institution of the Duomo. On Lake Maggiore, so it means about 100 kilometers, 60 miles distance from Milan. The lake was connected to Milan, to the city of Milan, through a system of canals, and so all the marble was carried to the Duomo area by water with large barges that could transport a large amount of marble. In fact, that was a very practical, quick, and less expensive way, in fact, of carrying the material of construction to the city of Milan. The marble is still used. If you have visited Milan before, you have certainly seen some works of maintenance on the surface of the Duomo, also on the inside of the Duomo. So at any time you will visit Milan, you will see, in fact, some scaffoldings on the church. What's the problem? The marble, the Candoglia marble, is a very fragile marble because it's very porous, and so it absorbs all the humidity, all the pollution, mostly nowadays, and so there is a very quick decay, about a century of time for the stones to decay. So there is a constant work of maintenance. stones for it. In some very specific occasions, it's necessary to replace the old stone with new stones. I mean, the most delicate parts are the spires, the statues, the decorations, and so on. So sometimes you will see very white parts. You can imagine that's a new stone, in fact, that's new marble. There are still about a dozen sculptors working exclusively for the Duomo of Milan, creating, in fact, those replicas. And as I told you, there is a constant work of engineers, of workers, and so on, continuing the maintenance and the restorations on the church. The problem is that this maintenance is very expensive, and so the Veneranda Fabbrica del Duomo, since the early construction, so since the 1300s, has to raise funds once for the construction, nowadays for the reconstruction, for the restorations of the Duomo. Of course, some generous donors were able to give large amounts of money, but actually the Veneranda Fabbrica accepts also the smallest donations. Also the most humble people of any age have donated. The Duomo of Milan, the history of the Duomo of Milan has always been related with the history of the Milanese. So that's really the church of the Milanese people, of the citizens. Well, this was just let's say an overview, a general overview, but I'd like to show you some very curious details that you can see inside the church, because in fact there is a lot to discover about the Duomo. Once you get in, immediately once you get in, you will see on the whole width of the cathedral a long line, and that's bizarre, let's say, to see on this line some of the zodiac signs. So why the zodiac? Actually, this line is a sundial. You have to imagine that this sundial has been created in the 18th century to show precisely 12 noon. Midday was in the 18th century, the start of the new day. And so to precisely know the moment, the exact moment of 12 noon, the sundial was created. You can see in the central photo from the southern side, there is a very small hole on the ceiling. From there, the sun, a ray of light, gets in every day at 12 and arrives directly on the sundial, on the line. To the right-hand side, you can see, in fact, the dot, let's say, this ball of line. On the symbol of Cancer, it means that 22nd of June, so the summer solstice, in a while, actually. To the left, the contrary, you can see the symbol of the winter solstice, so the end of December. That's Capricorn. Capricorn is the only symbol which is on the wall and not on the ground. And so, all along this line, you can see all the zodiac signs. You can also recognize your own zodiac sign. Also really interesting and really typical of Gothic cathedrals, the stained glass windows. Some details in this case, the three massive windows of the apse were once the most ancient windows, in fact. As the construction was started at the beginning from the back, so from the apse, you can imagine they were also the first to be created. Three windows, as three are the books of the Christian Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Apocalypse. The Apocalypse is the central window. You have to imagine that nowadays you are not able to see the original from the 15th century, because actually they were damaged during the centuries because of wars and accidents and so on. So they had to be replaced in the 19th century. Some of the frames of the central window are still the original ones. Also, on the top of the central stained glass window, you can see the symbol of the sun. The sun is the sun of justice. In a Christian church, the Son of Justice is a symbol for Jesus Christ. You also have to imagine that's the direction of east. Masses once were celebrated looking at east, looking at the sunrise, looking at the life starting every day as God, in fact, gives life. You can also see some other photos with details, in fact, of the stained glass windows. As I told you, that's very typical, generally speaking, of the Gothic style of Gothic churches. And in fact, at the beginning, several artists arrived, once again, several artists of glass, in fact. Artisans came from, once again, from France and from Germany. Many of the windows were sponsored from in fact, the workers, or also some nobles. There are some windows, an example, donated by popes, bishops, and so on. Statues, the statuary is also very important. You have to imagine the number of sculptors outside and inside the Duomo. The whole number of statues is more than 3,400 sculptors, many of them representing characters from the Bible, from the Gospels, saints, martyrs, as in example the statue that you are looking at. This is the statue of Saint Bartholomew. Bartholomew was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. He became a martyr, so he was killed because of his faith, because he was a Christian, and he was tortured. Well, it was skinned alive. That's a very cruel way, in fact, of dying and of being tortured. The statue you see is from the 1550s, so quite 500 years ago. The artist is a local artist, Marco da Grate, and he was able to create a perfect manual of anatomy. Look carefully at the legs, in example, in foreground. You can see the muscles, you can see the veins, the bones of this man. So imagine that, in fact, anatomy was quite a sort of new science, a new topic in the 16th century. Imagine that Leonardo da Vinci, which had lived in Milan in the previous century, so the very last 20 years of the 15th century, he had studied anatomy and had left many sketches, many drawings, many studies of the human body, of details of the human body, or the whole body. So don't expect Marco da Grate, don't expect this sculptor to have studied with Leonardo da Vinci, because in fact Leonardo passed away in 1519, and not in Italy, but instead in France. And as I told you, this is a statue from the 1550s. But it's possible to imagine that maybe this Marco da Grate had seen some of the sketches of Leonardo da Vinci. So, as I told you, Bartholomew, he had been skinned alive, so we see him represented without skin, but actually we see his skin. That's the cape the saint is wearing. So he is dressed, let's say, with his own skin, a sort of costume he's wearing. If you look on the photo on the right-hand side, you can see the cape ends with a leg, with a foot. In fact, that's the actual foot, that's the actual leg of the saint. And behind the back of Saint Bartholomew, you can see his face with the hairs and the beard. That's also very interesting to look at the organs. Now, part of the restorations, large part of the funds for the restorations are now used to restore the organ you can see in these photos. So the left organ, they are located along the choir. So that's, once again, on the back of the church, close to the high altar, the area of the high altar, the area where the weekday masses are organized. In fact, you have to imagine that in the Duomo, masses are celebrated every day, all year long, every day, many times per day. And the music has always been important for the religious life of the Duomo of Milan. We know that the first organ was already in the cathedral in the late 1300s. This organ you can see is from the 1500s. It was built during many years during the 16th century. It's now divided into two parts, left and right of the choir, and the total number of pipes is more than 15,000 pipes. You have to imagine part of the mechanism and the pipes had to be replaced during the years, but in fact still you can hear the great sound, and we would like you to hear in fact a bit of music from the organ. So I told you that since the beginning, music was a great experience for the masses, for the religious life of the Duomo. You have to imagine we have a cappella musicale, a schola cantorum, so a chapel of music. Since the 15th century, it still exists, and October every year is the month of music. That's the anniversary of the Veneranda Fabbrica del Duomo, and so to celebrate every year this anniversary, a month of concerts is organized. Under the choir, and so under the high altar, there is the crypt. The crypt was created during the early 1600s. There are two halls in the crypt, a chapel where masses, the morning masses are organized, where the chapter of the priests of the Duomo meet for their meetings, for their prayers. And then there is a room, in Italian it's called scurolo. It's a local word, it's a Milanese word to identify a tomb. And that's precisely the tomb of a very important archbishop of the city of Milan, St. Charles Borromeo. The Borromeo family has always been a very important and influential noble family in the city of Milan. They had also some properties on Lake Maggiore, so not far actually from the Candoglia marble. And the symbol you can see on the top, on the photo on the top, humilitas, humility in Latin, that's their coat of arms. The sarcophagus hosts, in fact, the mortal remains of Charles Borromeo. St. Charles Borromeo has been the Archbishop of Milan, of the Archdiocese of Milan during the second half of the 1500s, in a very delicate period for the Christianity, for the Christians, the moment of Counter-Reformation. So after the division between Lutherans and Catholics, let's say that Charles Borromeo has been a very, very important defensor of the Catholic religion, of the Catholic values. He was canonized saint in the very early 1600s, and the tomb under the high altar of the Duomo of Milan was built in this occasion in the early 1600s. The position under the high altar, you have to imagine, is considered one of the most important in the entire church. Now, we have seen something about the history, about art, but as I told you, also, to go to the top is a very curious and unique experience. You can either use a lift or go to the top with some stairs. You will see two levels. Those photos are taken from the first level you can reach, and it's a bit more than 30 meters. Then you can rise to the higher terrace, which is about 45 meters tall. And so you can wander around and see the 135 spires. You can see, as I told you, the large amount of statues and the most little and stunning decorations. So you can see an example from those photos that, well, every spire is topped with some saints, but also there are statues, very small statues, hidden inside niches. To have all the saints all around the Duomo was, let's say, a way to represent heaven. To have all the saints all around, in fact, heaven around God, in fact, heaven, all the saints, and so on around God. The smallest details are also mostly dedicated to nature, and so that's a way to represent earth, which has been created by God. And you have to imagine every single detail is perfect. Nobody, no person can see perfectly, can see in the entire Duomo, let's say. But God from above can. Some of the decorations, we were saying, some of the details, typical of Gothic cathedrals are the gargoyles. These are these kind of monsters which surround the whole church. There are 96 gargoyles all around the surface, the top of the Duomo. We were saying you can see them perfectly from above, from the rooftops. All monsters. You have to imagine the idea of having monsters was the idea of protecting the church from evil spirits, from the devil, from demons. But you can also notice they have the mouth open because, in fact, they're also used to hide the drain pipes. So they also have a technical function and not only a spiritual function. Some of the details we were saying, flowers or fruits, so nature, we were saying before, but also something that you wouldn't expect on a church. Like an example, look on the right-hand side. Sport. You can imagine this is not a very ancient decoration. This one is, in fact, from the 1930s, so quite modern. But let's say that in these small details, the artists have always been free to express themselves and their creativity. So, an example, this artist maybe loved sport. So maybe he loved tennis. You can see a tennis racket, or boxing, or we don't know, basketball, football, soccer. That's possible, in fact. And on the very top of the Duomo, the symbol of the Duomo and the symbol of Milan is the golden statue called the Madonnina. In Italian, it means the little Madonna, because from the ground, if you look to the top of the Duomo from the ground, the statue looks quite tiny. But it's not actually. It's more than 4 meters tall, about 13 feet. And as I told you, that's the symbol of the city of Milan. I said a golden statue. I'd actually had to say gilded because it's in fact copper gilded. Imagine that until the 1950s, it was forbidden to build anything taller than the Duomo of Milan because the Madonna had to be the highest point of the city. So 108 meters, that's the height of the highest spire with the statue included. Nowadays we have several skyscrapers which are quite twice, more than twice actually, the height of the Duomo, but to continue this tradition of having the Madonna on the top of the city and, let's say, protecting the citizens and the visitors, copies, replicas of the Madonnina have been created and put on the top of the highest buildings of the city of Milan. In some special occasions, like in the photo you are looking at, the Madonnina can hold a flag, a flag of Italy. These are for very special days, in example, Republic Day or Liberation Days, so to celebrate important national days. Well, this was an overview of the Duomo, but actually the Duomo is much more than this. So I invite you to come to Milan and visit the Duomo to discover, in example, where and why there is the Statue of Liberty on the front of the Duomo. Well, I anticipate you, it's not the Statue of Liberty, but it's a statue representing the Catholic Church, let's say, but it's older than the Statue of Liberty. So maybe Eiffel and Bartholdi have copied, or let's say taken some inspiration from this statue on the top on the front of the Duomo. We don't know, of course. During a tour with a guide of the Duomo of Milan, you can also see some quite terrific details. That's very curious, in fact, to see a skull, maybe representing death, or a mermaid which looks incredibly like the logo of a very famous international cafeteria. The AD, the creator of that famous cafeteria, in fact, said that he had seen exactly this symbol on the Duomo of Milan, and well, he took some inspiration for his own logo. And if you will take a tour with the Veneranda Fabbrica del Duomo, you will also see where, and once again, why some people are boxing on the top of a Catholic church. Thank you very much. Waiting for you to visit the Duomo of Milan once, for everybody, for all of you, it will be possible.
Thank you, Fiamma. That was lovely. I am so curious why there are people boxing on the top of the Duomo. We do have some questions that have come in through the Slido link, and we'll just post that in the chat one more time so that people can add on a few questions. But one question that's just come in for you, Fiamma, is there an after-hours tour of the Duomo? They mentioned doing something similar, I guess, at St. Mark's in Venice, where you can take a tour after hours or in different hours. Is there any sort of tours like that at the Duomo that are offered?
Well, the opening time of the church is generally for the entire year always the same, but during the summer period, the rooftops are open till late, are open for the evening till 8 p.m. So yes, it's possible to see the sunset from the top.
And someone also just asked if there are special concerts in the Duomo, perhaps if when the organ is playing, or other sorts of musical events.
There are several special concerts at the Duomo, several special events. As I told you, mostly in October, but not only. Actually, there are concerts all year long. Well, there are. Let's say there are very important, very specific times, in example Easter time, when in fact concerts are organized, or for special occasions, for special celebrations, and so on. And many important musicians and many important artists from all around the world, not only Italians, have performed during the years in the Duomo. So yes, there are several opportunities, in fact, of hearing the music, hearing the organ in the Duomo. Actually, also during a normal visit, because many times it's played during the masses. So also during a mass, during a celebration, people can get in and hear and have the opportunity of hearing the organ of the Duomo.
Great. That is another question that came in, actually, was, does the Duomo still hold services? It sounds like yes, it does.
Yes, there are services not only on Sundays, the sacred day for Christians, but every day of the week. Let's say that they are located in different areas. There is a chapel, a bit more limited, a bit more intimate also, let's say, for the weekday services, and on Sundays and festivities, they are celebrated at the high altar.
Great. And someone also asked, does the church host weddings and funerals for anyone from the public?
No, only public masses, only public services are organized. Funerals are only for very special people, for authorities, the bishops, of course, special people for the city of Milan. In this case, yes, but wedding, no. That's reserved only for public services. They are services for everybody, so not reserved for some people.
Makes sense. And there are a couple other questions coming in the chat as well. Dahlia asks, is Bartolomeo a special martyr for this Duomo?
Sorry?
Is Bartolomeo a special martyr for this Duomo, she asked. I'm not sure if you know what she's referring to.
A special symbol, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's say that Bartholomew, as all the martyrs, were symbolic for the faith, the strength of the Catholic faith. So people which have, in fact, been killed to defend their faith, to defend their religion. So they had to be sort of examples for people. I hope I have answered the questions.
Yeah, and then someone also wants to know, what are the statues on the spires on top of the roof? There was another question where someone asked if the statue of Napoleon is still atop one of the spires. I don't know the background on that one.
Yes, yes, there is one of the, let's say that one of the statues on the top of the highest highest rooftop of the highest terrace is, in fact, it's not exactly Napoleon, is Saint Napoleon. Let's say, you can imagine it was, in fact, commissioned by Napoleon himself, because Napoleon had conquered Italy, and Milan was the capital of the Kingdom of Italy under Napoleon. He self-crowned himself King of Italy inside the Duomo, and wanted the Duomo to be ended. So he wanted the construction to be over quite quickly. And so the construction, in fact, was ended under him, and he commissioned the statue of Saint Napoleon. Then there is another statue which was created about 40, 50 years later, representing Napoleon himself, but not commissioned by the emperor directly.
Really interesting. Someone else wants to know if the Duomo has been renovated over the years, and they were especially thinking about the sports carving you mentioned was added in the 1900s. So what sort of renovations has the Duomo gone through?
Well, the renovation of the Duomo is constant. It's a never-ending work, in fact. As I told you, there is a constant maintenance on the building itself, on the carvings, on structural maintenance, and so on. The pillars, an example, have been restored during the 1960s and 1980s, and that was mostly structural. So yes, in fact, there is constantly renovation. People are always working in the Duomo. Let's say that also for guides like me, getting inside the Duomo quite every day of my life, there is always something new, because sometimes it happens that you get inside with a group, and you part of the Duomo, part of the church is closed, because there is a huge crane in the middle of an aisle, and you have to turn around and go through, because people are working looking at the ceiling, controlling and checking. Consider also that the Veneranda Fabbrica del Duomo has a partnership with one of the most important universities of Milan, I mean the Politecnico di Milano, for scientific studies, for studies on engineers and engineering and so on.
Really interesting. One other comment, someone asked, was Milan one of the top cities or financial centers in Italy? When was its golden age, is the phrase that they're using?
Well, in my opinion, the golden age, the real golden age of Milan has been the 18th century. Milan was at that time under the Habsburgs, actually, so it was part of the Austrian Empire, but also it was the second city of the empire after Vienna. and so it was very wealthy at that time. The city itself was renovated. Also, the Duomo itself was built very quickly at that time. The Scala Opera House, an example, is a building that was created at that time. So, generally speaking, for the city of Milan, certainly the 18th century.
Great. And then someone else was amused by the statue where the man was wearing his own skin as a cape. They say that it's so gory. They're asking, was this style typical in the time period, or was that kind of an outstanding statue, unlike some of the others that were being created?
That was very outstanding. That was very outstanding. Imagine also how shocking could have been for common people. Well, nowadays we are used to know barely how the human body is done, but imagine people, common people, humble people, commoners, getting inside the Duomo and looking at that statue, how shocking that could have been. So something incredibly stunning and something really never seen before for that time. I would say also nowadays, actually.
Certainly. One question, someone wants to know, Alec just asked, is there a choir who sings at masses?
Yes, there is a large choir. Its maximum, it's about 60 people, children and young men, just male singers. But of course, depending on the occasions, it can be reduced. But at its maximum is that amount. But yes, there is still a choir singing.
And Chrissy wants to know, can they sing now? I assume she means in general in this time period. I assume they're not on hand in your back room, but yeah.
Well, let's say that I don't think they can see now, or maybe they can sing social distancing. In fact, the distancing, so maybe really reduced, but I'm not sure, because also services were allowed generally in Italy just since a couple of weeks and with several limitations. So I'm not sure they will sing all together, mostly for a while.
Yes, that makes sense. A few more questions.
Every day is something different, so who knows? Maybe next week we will be able to go to hear the choir. The choir. I don't know.
Great. There are just a few more that we'll go into before wrapping up. So one, Dahlia had a couple questions in the chat. One she asked is that the Last Supper famous painting is in Milan, but not at the Duomo. Is that correct? She wants.
It's not in the Duomo.
Why?
It's a church called Santa Maria delle Grazie, which was a monastery, a Dominican monastery actually, and when it was created, it was actually outside the city walls. It was the very limits of the city, outside, let's say, the countryside, actually. So it's in another venue, yes.
And there's also a question also from Dahlia. I'm not quite sure if what she's getting at here, but maybe you'll understand. She says, is there any relation to the Middle Ages Jerusalem at the Duomo? I'm not sure if you know of any connection with Jerusalem or the Middle Ages kind of time period.
Let's say that let's say that the idea of creating all the statues, it's called also the Celestial Jerusalem. It's heaven, generally speaking, but well, it's not related with the history of the Crusades, let's say. There are other churches in Milan which are connected with Jerusalem, but I wouldn't say the Duomo.
Great. And then moving towards it, someone just pointed out the questions in Slido too. There are a couple questions on visitors. One person wondering how many visitors you usually have each year, and someone else wondering if the Pope has visited the Duomo in general, if that's frequent.
Well, the Pope had visited the Duomo. Pope Francis came to Milan in 2017. The Pope previously, Benedict came 2012, I mean, so well, yes. Some popes were from Milan back in the past. Paul VI, the last, Pope Pius IV in the 1500s was the uncle of Charles Borromeo, buried in the Duomo. So I would say yes. The other question was how many visitors?
Yes, how many visitors a year do you usually have?
Well, last year, 2019 was well, it was 7 million visitors in Milan, generally speaking. So it, if I'm not wrong, it was something like 5 million visitors on at the Duomo. Well, many visitors, in fact. I cannot tell you for 2020, but yes, several million visitors, in fact. Consider also that can be also curious fact, during the Christmas Eve Mass or Easter Mass, about 10,000, 12,000 people are admitted inside. Many of those people have to stand. Everybody has to do security control at the entrance. From now on, visits are now allowed in the Duomo. People have also to wear masks and so on. But so there are some restrictions for visiting the Duomo, but still it's possible. And so, well, during normal celebrations, the amount is not that high, but on some special events, yes.
Great. Someone wants to know a little more about the sundial that you showed. They're wondering, did they actually use the sundial to tell time, or was it more just a decorative element?
No, it was used for time, in fact, because it had been created by Scientific Academy of Milan, which existed at that time. It took a few years actually to create it, to study for every day the exact position of 12 noon. But yes, it was the symbol of the day starting. So imagine that every time, every day at 12, when the line was, in fact, when the sun was on the line, a person showed a white flag from the top, from above, and from the castle, a cannon shot was shot, in fact, and that was the beginning of the new day. So simply it was midday and not midnight like we do nowadays.
That's beautiful. Jason wants to know, he says, thanks for the wonderful introduction. He wants to know, what is the best season for visiting Milan? What would you suggest?
My suggestion is fall, I mean September, October, because also June can be a nice season. September, October, the weather is very pleasant. It's not too rainy, it's not too hot, it's not too cold, the temperature is very warm. December is also nice because of the Christmas decorations. It can be quite cold, that's true, but if you like Christmas lightnings and Christmas decorations, that's a perfect moment. And then, of course, spring also can be very, very nice. So if I have to suggest, I would suggest you to avoid July, because it's very hot and humid.
Great. Just a few more, as we only have a few minutes left, but someone wants to know who designed and created all of the statues that are on top of the cathedral.
Oh, mostly local artists. Well, you have to imagine it's like 6 centuries, so it's a lot of local artists. You also have to imagine that for centuries, especially starting from the 1700s, the sculptors of the Duomo are employees, so they work exclusively for the Duomo, and so it's people which have dedicated their whole career, their whole life working on those statues. Let's say, I would say, no big name. So if you expect to see something by Michelangelo, you will be disappointed. It's mostly local people.
Great. And then 2 kind of general questions. Someone wants to know, how old is the Duomo and how long it took to build the Duomo?
How old? Well, the construction was started in 1386, so more than 630 years. A
Wow.
lot.
Yes. Someone wants to know how tall the Duomo is and compared to other Duomos in Italy. Is it taller, about the same? What's the height?
So the height the height of the highest spire is 108. The height of the roof of the highest rooftop, of the highest level you can reach, is 45 meters. On the inside, it's a bit shorter, of course, but the highest vault is about quite 40 meters tall. Among the Gothic churches, is one of the biggest. Gothic churches, I mean, in Italy, but also in France, in Germany, and so on. In Europe, generally speaking. So that's one of the big.
Or on the last question, which is, what is your favorite site in Milan? Besides the Duomo, where else would you recommend people visit?
Well, if you have a very short time, my suggestion is, of course, the Duomo, but we've spoken about it until now. Then you can go on the very side of the Duomo, also facing on the Duomo Square, you have to go through the Galleria, that's the arcade entitled to Victor Emmanuel II. That's the so-called drawing room of Milan, so it's the most elegant place of the town. So if you are a fashionista, if you're passionate for architecture, elegant shops, or want to have a nice a coffee in a nice cafe, that's the place to be. Just crossing it entirely, you can reach La Scala Opera House, where there is a museum, and from there you can face from one of the boxes and see the Opera House on this side. Or if you are interested in Renaissance, you have to go to the Castle Sforza. That's the fortress, which was also the residence of the Dukes of Milan in the 15th century, the Sforza family. That's where the name takes its origins.
Fabulous. Thank you. That was the last question that we had. Fiamma, I'll echo the comments of everyone in the chat saying how great of a job you did showing everyone all the details. A lot of people can't wait to be able to visit again in person.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
For everyone who's joined, I've put a link in the chat where you can find even more sessions like this for the Tiqets Culture Festival to continue throughout the week. There's always more inspiration on ways you can experience culture from home or when it's safe in your area, out and about, once again on the Tiqets blog. And there's plenty more on the Duomo that you can find on their website, again, to continue your learning. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you especially to Fiamma and the Duomo team for sharing this with us. We hope to see all of you again soon, and have a fabulous rest of your day.